Hey guys, Wendell here. It's time for the next installment of our home network server, network attached storage series thing, whatever you want to call it. And we promised that we were going to take a look at FreeNAS, so we're going to take a look at FreeNAS. Now, FreeNAS needs a little bit more horsepower computationally to run than most other network attached storage things, but let's say the use case here is that I'm sort of an old curmudgeon and I'm more worried about data integrity than anything. And ZFS, the file system format, is a very mature, very robust file system that comes from the enterprise, comes from really server grade stuff, and it's been around forever. But FreeNAS supports it. Not a lot of stuff other than FreeNAS supports it. Linux supports it, but the Linux support is not quite there yet. It's a little experimental. It may be encumbered by patents, and so it's sort of a hornet's nest for companies to support. But FreeNAS is sort of predicated on that your data is going to be stored on cheap, crappy hard drives. And so because it's on cheap, crappy hard drives, it sort of does things to make sure that the hard drives aren't lying and things like that. And so that's why you sort of want to run this. Now, this is not for just a complete neophyte. If you want something that's just, take it out of the box and you're ready to go, you really should check out some of our other NAS, home server videos. This has got a little bit more power. It's a little bit more robust. It's perhaps not as user-friendly, although it is really user-friendly. And the new features of FreeNAS 9.2 and later really, really seal the deal for me. So FreeNAS is not based on Linux. It's actually based on FreeBSD. So it's even more esoteric than Linux. So if you've gotten your feet wet a little bit with Linux, it's like Linux, but it's not Linux at all in the sense that it's, a Unix derived operating system. I'm going to get hate mail for that. But it is what it is. So the first thing that you want to do is go to download. And it's like, no, I just want to download it. I'm not. You can sign up for the newsletter if you want. All right, so you've got 4 options here. You can get the stable upgrade if you're already running it, the stable release, the beta release, or the nightly release. Now, if you just click this, it's going to let you download the ISO. I don't know that we want the ISO. I think we really want the image version. So I'm going to go here. Now, what's the difference between the ISO and the image? Well, the ISO, you burn to CD, and then you can install it from CD. Or you can download the image and put it on a USB stick, and it's ready to go on a USB stick. Like, there's not really an installation. You put it on a USB stick, and it runs from USB. You really want to run it that way. You don't want to install it, like if you've got a whole bunch of multi-terabyte hard drives, you really want to install it on a USB stick. It's meant to be installed on a USB stick. Historically, that wasn't always true. You can get some, like 1 gigabyte SATA flash devices and install it to that if you really, really want to. But there is nothing wrong with installing it to USB. So I'm on Windows on this, so I'm going to download this, and it's going to download. And the other thing that we're going to need is Win32 Disk Imager. So you'll have to Google that and go to SourceForge and download it. And once you've done downloading it, so once you've got the image, you'll browse for the image, and then you'll select the USB device. If you have any other external devices or USB drives plugged in and you're not sure, just unplug them, because there's too much chance that you might accidentally select the wrong device, and this will override it. I mean, this formats it. This does terrible things to the drive that you have plugged in that you're going to use this. So just be careful with that. Okay, so once you've got it in there, you put it in the machine and you boot up. And it will boot up to a menu that's got a couple of options. It'll try to automatically configure the network if you've got DHCP and all that kind of thing, and then it'll give you an IP address. So in our case, we've got this. It'll ask you, when you first connect, it'll ask you for a password. Now, I'm actually running FreeNAS on the Thecus N5550. We had a separate review video of that. You guys should check that out. Their operating system of choice with this is Linux, which is fine, but I wanted to try out FreeBSD. ZFS really performs a lot better if you've got a lot of RAM, and really, really well if you're using a flash disk for caching, like a 32 or a 64 gig flash disk. But, at the end of the day, this machine doesn't have a ton of horsepower, and so we're not actually going to be able to use some of the more advanced features of ZFS. So, but that's pretty much it to installing FreeNAS. And so setting up FreeNAS is a lot like other NASs. It's a little more involved. Setting up the ZFS volume is probably the most involved thing from your disks. So let's go through that now. All right, so what we want to do is set up a volume. So I've got my 4 terabyte drives installed here. I'm going to do RAID Z. That's completely fine. I've got some other options here. The L2 ARC is what we could use on a flash disk and get a little bit better performance, but we're going to not use that for right now. So we're just going to do RAID Z. And sometimes you've got an extra option here for you could do like actually RAID Z2 or something like that, but that's fine. And so, and with ZFS, you also need to add, it's a power of 2 plus 1. So you have 2 hard drives plus 1 is 3, or 4 hard drives plus 1 is 5. This N5550 has 5 bays, so it's actually pretty much perfect for doing 5 bays. In fact, well, no, I don't want to do that with, I was going to say, let's put in 2 more 4 terabyte drives, but I'm not going to need that much space. So maybe I could put in 5 1 terabyte drives, but I sort of want to see what the performance of this is first. So let's see how this goes. Oh, and let's give it a volume name. Let's call it Vol1, and this will destroy all the information that are on those disks. Now, I think we need to create a data set, and a data set is just a grouping of files. It's like a folder, but it's a little bit more powerful than that. And the reason we want to create a data set is because we want snapshots and shadow copy, and this will make doing snapshots and shadow copy type functionality a little easier. Shadow copy is a Windows word. It came in vogue in Server 2003, and it's a periodic snapshot that the operating system does that you can set up by default. Shadow copy does 2 snapshots a day on weekdays, and so if you delete a whole bunch of files, you can actually pull up the last couple weeks of snapshots and recover things. I think it was off by default in Server 03, but it was on in Server. It was part of even Windows 7 Pro, and they took it out in Windows 8 because they're dumb, and they really shouldn't have done that. Thanks, Microsoft. So I'm just going to call this data set 1. Yeah, real clever. Now, for compression, you can actually turn on compression and some other stuff, but again, this is not a really powerful system. This is running an Atom. If you're going to turn on compression, I'd recommend at least a middle-of-the-road i3, if not an i5. But, just keep that in mind. And then ZFS deduplication. Do not turn this on. You will need a lot of RAM to deal with this. If you use the more advanced options with ZFS and you do not have enough RAM, your machine will work great until one day it doesn't work anymore, and the machine will mysteriously hang whenever you try to mount this volume. And what happens is it runs out of RAM, and then it starts using the swap file on the hard drive, and then it runs really slow because it's basically using the hard drive like RAM. Then it eventually runs out of RAM, and the whole machine just hangs. You don't always get a good indication of that. They're working on that in the FreeBSD kernel, and there are some system parameters that you can tweak to do that. But if that sounds really crazy and over your head, don't mess with it. Deduplication, like if you copied, say you had an ISO of Ubuntu and you copied it to 2 different folders on your NAS, it would deduplicate it, meaning that the file would be in both places when you went to look at it, but it would actually only store 1 copy. So if you have a huge MP3 collection and it's organized a couple of different ways, and you've got multiple copies of songs, if the files are exactly binary compatible, you won't actually store more than 1 file. It's just a pointer to the same block of data. But in order to do that, all of your data has to be put into this huge database sort of behind your back. And in order to do that, you need an insane amount of RAM. It's about 1.5 terabytes or 1.5 gigabytes of RAM per terabyte of disk space, which is, we're working with 2 gigs here, so no, ain't happening. Plus you need about 4 gigabytes just for the OS, so it's like 4 gigabytes for the OS plus another 1.5 gigabytes of RAM for every terabyte of storage that you have. So don't turn that on. And this is the record size, so I'm just gonna leave it on auto. And that's it. We've created the data sets. Now there's some other terminology that you can learn here real quick. ZFS scrubs, it'll periodically scan the disk for information that has become corrupt. One of the things with ZFS is it stores information, and it stores a mathematical checksum with the information. This is a little different than just about any other file system out there. NTFS, FAT32, whatever you're using on Mac OS, the Mac OS extended journal, whatever. This actually doesn't really trust the hard drives. And this is one reason that you don't want to run a RAID controller necessarily with ZFS, because ZFS is looking at each drive individually to see if any of the drives individually are lying. If you use a hardware RAID controller, then you have, 2, 3, 4, 5 drives behind a RAID controller, and ZFS can't query the individual drives. Because of that, if it gets data through the RAID controller that's not what it had written, it assumes the whole thing is bad, which is a valid assumption because the controller is not necessarily reporting an error. So again, this is just part of the ZFS design. It's designed to deal with crappy hard drives that may be lying, or hard drives that have a failure mode where they're basically going schizophrenic, or they don't know, or they're just returning random data. So what this does is this allows you to configure and fine-tune how it's going to do those patrols to sort of make sure that all of the disks are there and that the disks are returning what you wrote to them. This really, really minimizes the chances of data corruption. And, I mentioned that I was an old curmudgeon. This is the old curmudgeon, like, I'm going to put my vacation photos and all my important data that I might not look at for 5 years. I need to be sure that when I go to get it, that it's going to be what I'd written. Too many times in the past, I've used a RAID array or something like that, or a hard drive, and I've gone to get it, and the data was kind of there, but it was also kind of corrupt. So ZFS really, really solves that problem. Now, one of the things about ZFS that we talk about is snapshots. And so I'm going to add a periodic snapshot here. And I'm going to say it's got a lifetime of 2 weeks. It's going to start at 9 in the morning, and it's going to end at 6 o'clock p.m. I'm not going to do it in a 1 hour interval. I'm going to do a 4 hour interval. Let's see, that's 4 hours. Let's do 6 hours. All right, so that's pretty good. And it's going to run 5 days of the week. Let's have it run Saturday and Sunday too, and I'll keep 2 weeks. All right, so what this does for us, let's say that I've copied my MP3 collection, and there's thousands and thousands of MP3s. I don't actually listen to much music, so I don't really have much of an MP3 connection, but I'm sure you guys do, or movie files or whatever. So with this, if I accidentally delete something and I don't notice for a day or two, I can actually go back here, and this thing will hang on to whatever I've deleted for 2 weeks. So it's kind of like the recycle bin, but it's the recycle bin on steroids. So you can't accidentally, like, once it's in the snapshot here, it's there. You guys know the virus, like a crypto locker where it encrypts all your stuff? If you've got snapshots going, the snapshots in the past are read-only, there's nothing crypto locker can do about it. So if it gets on your NAS and your home computer and it encrypts everything, these snapshots will save your butt because you have snapshots going back 2 weeks in the past, every 6 hours. So if you're working and, there was a snapshot at 9 in the morning and at noon you've accidentally done something, you can roll back to what it was at 9 a.m. or the previous day or the day before that or something like that. This is like the shadow copy functionality in Windows. It's also important that we create these snapshots before creating the Windows share so that when the Windows share is created, it will expose the periodic snapshots as shadow copy on the shadow copy tab. Just do it in this order. Trust me, it'll be fine. And there we can see that on the ZFS snapshots, it's now created one snapshot for us. So that's good. Now we can go down to sharing and create a share. We really probably should create a folder, but that's okay. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to browse, and we're going to do it here. There's the volume, and then there's our data set. And so we're going to call this DS1. Do it 9 times, we'll have DS9. We do want to do export recycle bins. We're going to allow guest access. You really want to set up users and security and things like that, but yeah, we'll just do this for right now. And then that's going to turn on CIFS for us. CIFS stands for Common Internet File System. It's basically the Windows share. We may also need to set the permissions. So I've gone to / FreeNAS on the network, and now I've got DS1. Let's see if it'll let me create a folder. Nope, it says I don't have permission. That's not entirely unexpected. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to allow everybody. Now normally you'd set up users, and the users that you set up would be in here. These are the built-in users and groups that come with FreeBSD. Don't mess with them. Just know that it's there. So I'm just going to enable everybody. Yay, fix forever. All right. So we're going to call this stuff. All right, so there's stuff. Now let's right click on this and go to properties and see if we've got our shadow copies. Oh, we do previous versions. Okay. Well, there's not any yet, but it would show up in here and you could browse it and it would show you the previous installation or the previous instances of what was there. So if you delete something and you don't notice it for like a week, 2 weeks, whatever you configure, then there you go. If you're worried about it taking up a whole bunch of space, you can actually see how much space the particular snapshots are using. And so this thing is, I've got some machines that have hundreds of snapshots that go back a lot farther than 2 weeks that are more archive machines, like quarterly and things like that. This will show you the amount of space that you're using on your snapshot. So if you've got a 4 terabyte volume and you copy a terabyte to it and you delete it and you copy another terabyte and you delete it and you're moving information in and out, it's possible that your snapshots would take up a significant amount of your space that you thought you had deleted. And so if you wanted to clear it ahead of time, you could come in here and log in and destroy the snapshot and free the space on your disk. That's an option. Now, there's something I want to show you now that we've gotten the share set up. I'm going to come over here to this shell window. I'm going to run top. And this is pretty similar to the top thing that we were looking at in the other video to see exactly what the NAS is doing. And I'm also going to drag our same test file to this just to see how fast it goes. And I think what we're going to find is that, it's actually a bit slower. And this is not unexpected because ZFS is doing more stuff in the background. But if you look at our utilization over here, see the CPU usage is actually less than before. But check out the RAM. We've got 152 megs active, 1.5 gig wired, only 126 meg free. This amount of RAM here is actually being used by the FreeNAS or the ZFS cache system. So it really isn't like used RAM, but this shows that we're really, really low on RAM for what this is, and our load average is 1.11. So our load average is about the same, maybe a little bit less than under Linux, but ZFS is doing a lot more in terms of our RAID situation than MD was doing under Linux. And again, it's all just about snapshots. So there's a ton more to cover with ZFS, but I don't want to bore you out of your minds. Just a couple things I'll show you real quick. Smart tests. This is again one of those things that, Smart is the built-in diagnostic thing for a hard drive. If you don't know what it is, just Google it and you can learn more about it. But you can set up FreeNAS to periodically run smart diagnostics as well, as well as the patrol scrub thing that it does with your ZFS volumes. You can also have FreeNAS email you when something goes wrong or something goes down, that kind of thing. It also does the Apple file sharing, Windows file sharing, Unix sharing. It also does rsync, that sort of thing. The plugin system is brand new in FreeNAS. This was really added. And well, I guess it was in version 8 a little bit, but you kind of had to do it manually. Version 9 adds a lot of cool stuff. There is a ton of cool plugins here that is similar, but not quite the same as the kind of plugins that are available on the Thecus 5550 out of the box. But you can actually, OwnCloud and the Plex Media Server, those are the big ones. You can also get transmission. There are other programs like Couch Potato and Sickbeard. You'll have to Google those to find out what they do. They're very awesome, but we won't talk about them. The other thing is CrashPlan. CrashPlan is an awesome backup system. So you can use it for differential backups on your laptop you travel with and other things, and that works really well. There's also the BitTorrent Sync client. Now, I've used this. It works really well. BitTorrent Sync can be as private or as public as you want. It can depend. It can be totally public, but depend on your encryption. But this can be a BitTorrent sync. This can participate in a BitTorrent sync cloud so that you can have your desktop and your laptop and your whatever else all syncing files. So these plugins could probably have their own video, just the ones that are here. There's also another function called jails. And I have not set up jails yet, but in jails, you can actually run sort of pseudo virtual machines on this, including Linux. So you can install Debian or Ubuntu or something like that under FreeNAS. The only drawback is that I'm not aware of anybody that's got, Windows Server or anything like that running this. It's not really a true virtual machine. So I don't think that it will really work like that for Windows Server. So if you really wanted to run Windows Server under FreeNAS, I don't think it's going to happen. But you can run Linux and you can run applications on Linux and have those sort of be self-contained. With the plugins, it's very often the case that you've got to manage the configuration and backup yourself. So like with Plex Media Server, one thing I ran into on a previous version of FreeNAS is that I had to back up the media database myself and restore it, because when I went to update Plex Media Server, it just reset everything. So I'm comfortable doing that, but until you really get your feet wet and you really get in here and sort of get in the engine and take it apart, that might not be something that's comfortable for you. Whereas, a completed commercial solution like what like what we saw in the Thecus 5550, they're sort of taking those things into account, and they've got a little bit more commercial polish behind it. That particular bug with Plex Media Server is supposed to be fixed in 9.2.1. It is in the bug tracker, so just be aware of that. But if you're not using Plex Media Server, or you haven't got a ton of media configured in Plex Media Server, then it probably wouldn't really apply to you. There's also a reporting tab, which doesn't really matter a whole lot right now because we don't have a whole lot going on in reporting. But this is really nice historically, because you can look at your machine over time, potentially over a long period of time, and see how busy it's been and what it's been up to. And it's like, well, this seems awfully slow. You can check a chart and it'll say, well, your disk utilization is higher, or you've got more processes, or you're lower on RAM, or whatever. This is just useful from a diagnostic standpoint. All right, well, that's been a really quick and, just probably too quick overview of FreeNAS and the stuff that you can do with FreeNAS. It's another, you can run this on an old computer with, hard drives, pretty much anything you can think of. It does not need a RAID controller because of the ZFS situation. You do want to run it on a decent machine. It's probably nice to have error correcting RAM, although some stuff that I read on the internet recently suggests that as long as your RAM is not just completely terrible, that's not a dire situation. If you don't have error correcting RAM, it's not critical. But the more important your stuff is, the more money you're going to put into your home storage situation. So just keep that in mind. All right, take care, rate, subscribe. See you guys in the forums. If you have questions, do post on the forum, because I'm pretty good about hopping on there and answering questions and helping. So definitely post on the forums.